For over a decade, Roger Moore had the task of living up to everything Sean Connery had put in place as 007. And while some will defend Moore forever, we cannot forget the clown costumes, and the slide whistles, and the gondola chases, and so much more that pushed James Bond into an uncharted level of ridiculousness. But Timothy Dalton would go on to reinvent James Bond in a way that may not have sat with contemporary audiences, but marked a true challenge for what it meant to carry the torch. Timothy Dalton played 007 just twice, but still left his mark on the franchise, and was able to go on to have a fairly interesting career. Some ups, some downs, but what the f*** is he doing now? That's right, what the f*** happened to Timothy Dalton? But to truly understand what the f*** happened to Timothy Dalton, we must begin at the beginning, and the beginning began when he was born on his birthday in 1946, Wales. As a teen, he caught that good old theater bug during a production of Macbeth. And that's quite a traditional way to fall in love with theater, no doubt matched by his taking up acting interests with London's National Youth Theatre and studies at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. Yet he would never finish here, saying his educators were oppressive sorts. Young Timmy D landed his first acting gig on the stage in London with, yes, the work of Shakespeare, Coriolanus. Coriolanus? He too, through the 60s and 80s, would continue to dabble in that Shakespeare stuff. Just look at this list here of Shakespearean productions that he took part in. The Merchant of Venice, Richard III, King Lear, Henry V, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Anthony and Cleopatra, Love's Labor Lost, As You Like It, and, other things. There, too, was an early go at the title role of Little Malcolm and his struggle against the eunuchs. And what stands as his most recent go at the stage, a key role in the first production of his Dark Materials, 2003 to 2004. Such performances on the stage would help Timothy Dalton make his way over to television, that's right, the TV. Playing in the Malcolm McDowell series, Saturday While Sunday, as well as appearing in a few episodes of the BBC anthology series, Play of the Month. And his introduction to American television came with the 1978 miniseries, Centennial, in which he played an explorer who would explore things. Dalton, too, would make one hell of a debut on the big screen, playing Philip II of France in 1968's The Lion in Winter, opposite Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole. And rumor has it was Peter O'Toole who recommended young Timothy for the job. He had high praise for this up-and-comer, but the biggest and most foretelling opportunity came when he was asked to audition for On Her Majesty's Secret Service to take over the role of 007 James Bond from Mr. Sean Connery. Something that at the time seemed, impossible. But the only person standing in the way of Timothy Dalton was, Timothy Dalton, who is a massive fan of the Ian Fleming books. You see, this man loved James Bond so much that he turned down the part because he thought he was too young for the character. He cared more about the franchise than his career, y'all. He had another reason entirely when he turned down 1981's For Your Eyes Only, believing the series had been relying too much on comedy. Dalton's dislike for this variation of James Bond would be evident when he finally signed on for The Living Daylights in 1987. But this one only worked out because of circumstances surrounding the guy who was lined up first, Pierce Brosnan, whose Remington Steele contract kept him at bay. So Timothy Dalton was like, okay, I guess it's time, and he swept in there and did just fine. Timothy Dalton is never ranked as the best James Bond, but he felt like such a natural in his introduction, challenging both himself as an actor and 007 as a character by removing his, quote, role model status, which helped move the franchise in a new direction. Unfortunately, the box office numbers were barely better than Roger Moore's final outing, 1985's A View to a Kill, topping out at $51 million domestically. numbers would be even lower for 1989's License to Kill, whose $35 million was the worst Bond haul since the mid-70s. Despite his attempts to freshen up Bond, and even balance his tenure with lighter fare like Hawks, Timothy Dalton's spin on James Bond was a turn-off for contemporary audiences. They just didn't get it, especially compared to the cheeky Roger Moore. And don't get us wrong, we actually really like the cheesy James Bond movies, but it was time for something different. Or was it? I don't know. Nobody knows. But yeah, instead, audiences, they got a straighter, rougher, far less humorous 007 that was actually, I guess, ahead of its time, because this sort of steel would set the stage for the James Bonds of the future. So without Timothy Dalton taking this darker risk, we wouldn't have these, darker, gritty James Bond movies that, all you Bond babies seem to like. Timothy Dalton actually had a 3-contract deal, but lawsuits between Eon and MGM related to rights halted it. And by the time things were sorted out in 1992, there had been too big of a gap for Dalton to just jump right into 007, even if the studios wanted to sign him for another multi-picture deal, which they didn't. But he didn't need them. So it was time for Timothy Dalton to redirect his attention, leaving us behind just 2 performances as James Bond. 2's better than nothing, though. Between initially turning down Bond and, turning down Bond again, Timothy Dalton appeared in a trio of films in the 1970s. There was Wuthering Heights, he was Prince Rupert in Cromwell, and he was in Italy's The Voyeur. He followed that up with 1971's Mary, Queen of Scots, playing Henry Stewart, displaying an active interest in historical dramas. He would land a role as a civil servant in 1971's Permission to Kill, not to be confused with License to Kill, all while continuing to hone his stage work. Dalton wrapped up the 1970s with a diverse trio of films. There was Sextet, in which he played the husband to Mae West, in her final/comeback role. He was in the film The Man Who Knew Love, and in 1979 he appeared in Agatha, playing Agatha Christie's husband. He would later appear in TV's Agatha Christie's Marple in 2006, showing his admiration for yet another English scribe. The guy does Shakespeare and Christie. And Fleming. But then, Timothy Dalton got to loosen up quite a bit and have a lot of fun in the delightfully hammy turn, playing a frickin' awesome prince in 1980's Flash Gordon, where he steals the show. This movie's absolutely bonkers and he gets the tone. He knew what kind of movie he was making and he was enjoying every second of it, which makes us, the audience, also enjoy every second of it. Look at all of these seconds of this movie that you can enjoy. Watch it. Then he was in a Coco Chanel movie called Chanel Solitaire. There was a 1983 miniseries, Jane Eyre. You could also catch him in a dreadful gothic horror, The Doctor and the Devils, and the TV movie Florence Nightingale. This was all his pre-Bond days. But what would he do now? Now that he had played, one of the most iconic characters ever. Well, first came something he had grown accustomed to, the costume drama, in a film called The King's Whore in 1990. Next, he would truly give himself a challenge, playing actor/Nazi Neville Sinclair in The Rocketeer. Much like Flash Gordon, you can see him absolutely having a blast and truly understanding what kind of movie this is. Timothy Dalton, he's one of those guys that, he has that classic type of face where you're like, you should have been born a few decades earlier. He would have absolutely crushed it in old school Hollywood, and I'm sure he wouldn't have been a real Nazi. But yeah, in The Rocketeer, he's having some of the most fun he's ever had on screen. Look at all those explosions. Look at all that fun. Remember when movies used to be fun? He continued through the 1990s with a string of works that range from campy to against type to forgettable. He played a werewolf hunter in Tales from the Crypt, and he played a criminal on the short-lived BBC series Framed. There was also a romantic comedy called Naked in New York, and he did a family flick called Saltwater Moose, and would take on another iconic character of the screen, Rhett Butler, in 1994's Scarlet. and Fran Drescher would drag him into a movie called The Beautician and the Beast, which, he's kind of perfect in. There was also a lot more television, like Showtime's The Informant, HBO's Made Men, the period piece The Reef, and the ABC miniseries Cleopatra, landing him the role of Julius Caesar. He gets to play all the best characters. So then, after the smoke had cleared on Timothy Dalton's tenure as James Bond, filmmakers and producers, they wanted the opportunity to attach a once big name to their lower level project. Dalton offered them that 007 cred, And sometimes good movies are made this way, but a lot of times this ends up in crap. Like the Fox family film Timeshare, or the Showtime movie Possessed. This also includes a small role in the forgettable western American Outlaws. And he tried his best, but I feel like he could have done better playing Brendan Fraser's abducted father in Looney Tunes Back in Action. He was also the biggest name in a shitty TV production of Hercules in 2005. But you know what? When Timothy Dalton is at his best is when he's having fun. And he was finally able to have some fun again in 2007's Hot Fuzz, where he perfectly plays the villain, and he was cast because Edgar Wright has so much respect for this man. You see, this is the thing with Timothy Dalton. It's all about who's casting him. It seems like if the filmmaker truly understands and appreciates and loves and respects this man and his craft, then they're able to get some of the best stuff out of him. But if they're just casting him because, he's famous, then it doesn't work. When those cast him who actually admire him as a presence and not just as a former James Bond person. Consider his terrific turn in Doctor Who as the Time Lord founder, or his compelling arc in Chuck. These people making these shows, they knew how to use Timmy D. But his most pure rebirth came as a character who is probably more Timothy Dalton than we might expect. Toy Story's Mr. Pricklepants, playing this hedgehog to perfection in 2 of the Toy Story movies and numerous shorts. You could also hear his voice in some Tangled adaptations and some Tinkerbell movies, who's canceled now because she's so problematic. But you know who's not canceled? Timothy Dalton. But here I go, I'm going to say it right now, Penny Dreadful is Timothy Dalton's best performance in most recent memory. This wonderfully creepy show uses this man and all of his skills and all of his talents and just lets him go. Everything you want to see Timothy Dalton do, he does in Penny Dreadful and, some more. He gets to be suave and smooth and dangerous and scary and just freaking cool. And that's the thing with Timothy Dalton, he never lost his cool. Even when he wasn't having the best of times in his career, he never lost the cool. And cool, it's really easy to lose, trust me, I lost it years ago.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
For the most part, at this point, Timothy Dalton has crawled from his post-Bond slump. And when he's allowed to have fun, and the filmmaker truly understands him as an artist, he can give us some wonderful things. Like, as I previously mentioned, Penny Dreadful, or 2010's The Tourist, and of course, DC's Doom Patrol, showing us again that he still gets it. And he had a really meaty role in The Crown, and that Yellowstone spin-off, 1923. So yeah, actually, Timothy Dalton, I think he's doing better than ever. He's always been in interesting films, stage work, and television, but this time, it feels like Hollywood has given him a license to kill it on the screen again. Oh my god, he's freaking awesome. And you know what? It kind of feels like he knows it. And because of all of these wonderful performances over the decades, everyone in the entire world has come to learn that Timothy Dalton, is far more than James Bond. So nobody should give a fuck about what the fuck happened to Timothy Dalton because he's doing just fine.